Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 Om Namo So we're reading from the Bhagavad Gita chapter 5, the Yoga of the Supreme Person, and verse number 8. So I'll just go ahead and repeat it, or recite it, and then I'll also read verse number 9. Saridam yad avapnoti yachapi utkramatishvara grihit vaitani samyati vayu gandhan ivasayat. Translation: the living entity in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another as the air carries aromas. Thus he takes on one kind of body and again quits it to take another. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Here, the living entity is described as Ishvara, the controller of his own body. If he likes, he can change his body to a higher grade, and if he likes, he can move to a lower class. Minute independence is there. The change his body undergoes depends upon him. At the time of death, the consciousness he has created will carry him onto the next type of body. If he has made his consciousness like that of a cat or dog, he is sure to change to a cat's or dog's body. And if he has fixed his consciousness on godly qualities, he will change into the form of a demigod. And if he is in Krishna consciousness, he will be transferred to Krishna Loka. In the spiritual world, to Krishna Loka in the spiritual world, and will associate with Krishna. It is a false claim that after the annihilation of this body, everything is finished. The individual soul is transmigrating from one body to another, and his present body and present activities are the background of his next body. One gets a different body according to karma, and he has to quit this body in due course. It is stated here that the subtle body, which carries the conception of the next body, develops another body in the next life. This process of transmigrating from one body to another and struggling while in the body is called karshati, or struggle for existence. Om Jnana Timidandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshudun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagnajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Padijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Shri Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Kanta Rameshwari Shamanu Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Devacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So I'll read the English translation to verse 8, and I'll also read the English translation to verse 9. The living entity in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to the other, as the air carries aromas. Thus he takes one kind of body and again quits it to take another. The next verse, the living entity, thus taking another gross body, obtains a certain type of ear, eye, tongue, nose, and sense of touch, which are grouped about the mind. He thus enjoys a particular set of sense objects. So this seems, and it is in one sense, the very basic aspects of our Krishna conscious philosophy. It's in chapter 15 here, and it's also in chapter 2. The same exact teaching is in chapter 2. But when we look at this, or when we hear these or read these verses, we really get an understanding of how much our everyday activities are influencing us in very, very specific ways. Because look at what it's saying here, that we get another gross body depending on our activities, and we get a very specific type of ear, a very specific type of eye, very specific type of tongue, nose, and sense of touch. So everything that we have is very, very specific. It's tailor-made for us, by us. Right? Because it all depends on how we behave in one life, that we're going to get a very specific type of body, but not only a specific type of physical features. The way we think and the way we speak and the way we behave are all determined by us. And I think this is a nice verse because it is the beginning of the new year. It's the beginning of the year, now we're beginning 2017, and we're moving forward with there's a lot ahead of us. And we're all talking about resolutions. What kind of resolutions do I want to make? Do I want to make any resolutions? The last time I made some resolutions, they didn't last more than a week. Is it really worth it? But really to understand, even philosophically, that it's so important to try to make positive resolutions because they are determining who we're going to become. We didn't end up the way we are right now by chance. A lot of people might believe that, wherever I am in my life, whatever good or bad's happening to me, it's kind of happening by chance, and that I didn't really have much to do with it. And nothing could be further from the truth, actually. Right? We had everything to do with it. It is our own behavior and actions that's determining where we're going to end up. So, in the Nectar of Devotion, another one of our very prominent texts, which is based on the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu by Rupa Goswami, it's explained that, for example, when an individual does a negative action, a negative action means you did something to hurt someone, you cheated someone, something like that, that we're not only going to get a karmic reaction for that, like at some point in our life, in this life or in the next, and that's another thing we can't understand is when it's going to come back to us. It will come back to us. But beyond just the reaction coming back to us, what else is going to happen is that behavior is going to impact us psychologically, meaning that we'll have a tendency now to repeat that action. So the propensity to commit that act again will again be planted in our mind, and we'll repeat that over and over and over again. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. Not only do you get a negative reaction for that, because we engaged in it, there's a psychological propensity to do it again. So, when you look at kids, right? Kids have in one sense, they know what they want, and they know what they like, and they know what they don't like. It's very quickly, like there's certain foods they won't eat, there's certain toys they just won't play with. You almost wonder, how and when did this kid have a chance to try different foods and say okay, I like this and I don't like this. When did they do this? How did they do this? Well, according to this is where we ended up. This is what we did in our previous life. The things that we liked in our previous life, the things that we disliked in our previous life, the things we were attracted to or averse to, those same mental conditionings were transferred to us in this very life. So it's explained when the soul moves from one body to another, at the time of death, when the soul goes from one body and enters the womb of another mother, the mind and the intellect go with the soul. So our mind and intellect are two different things. They're not the same thing. The mind basically functions off of our just desires. I want something, I'm going to grab it. It's not really thinking whether or not it's good or bad. It just wants. It's almost like how a child might function. They might see a shiny knife. They think, oh, this is a great toy. This looks like, I see my mom playing with it every day. I'm sure I can have a great time with it too. Right? My mom does this with it, I guess I can do the same thing with it too. Right? It's not thinking that, well, it doesn't have that capacity. So the mind is kind of like the child. Right? It just kind of responds without really thinking so much. The intellect is like the parent. And so to whatever degree we've developed our mind, to whatever degree we've developed our intelligence, that same conditioning is going to be passed down to us. It's going to go with the soul into the next body. And so I like to think that we're not very different than who we were in our previous life. Like a child, a 1-year-old child, a 2-year-old child, not too long ago, they were a very old person. Right? They were a very old person. You might think, oh, look at my little cute little child. Yeah, but they were probably 80 years old just like a year ago or so. Or maybe 2 years ago. They were like 60, 70, 80, 90 years old. They were older than you are now. But right now, they just happen to be a child. And they knew much more than you probably know now. But now it's like you press the reset button, so they have to start all over again. But when you look at your child, I know you may not want to look at your child that way. That's probably not the ideal way to look at your child. But, I mean, philosophically, you can think about it. Well, this person who I'm having to teach everything all over again was not too long ago was probably 80, 90 years old, and who knows what they lived. Maybe they were the president of a country. Maybe they were a famous athlete. Maybe they were a musician. Maybe who knows what they were, right? So, but the point is, it all carries forward. There isn't anything that doesn't really carry forward. So again, from our physical features to our psychological disposition, the things that we're afraid of, and I'm going to show you a video in a little bit if we can figure out how this thing works, they're showing some research that was done, right, on children who remember their previous lives. And there was actually research that was done at the University of Virginia where they studied children who had remembered their previous lives. And they were able to, for example, if a child was able to remember enough detail that the research team could verify, then they would say that, yes, this person actually remembers the specific details of another person who had lived not too long ago. But the child, these would have to be very specific cases where the child would remember their previous legal name, they would remember the town they lived in, they would know the parents' names, they would know their occupation, they might remember siblings. So when they had enough information, then the research team could pull records from the local hospital where that child claimed to have died. And if they had records, then this person, how does this 2-3-year-old child know so much detail about this person nobody would know this about this individual. So, and the research team also recognized that I believe it was about 2/3 of the cases, they had a phobia related to the way they died in the previous life. They could demonstrate a phobia. So like, for example, maybe a child, and most of the kids who remembered their previous lives had a traumatic death. They didn't die very peacefully. They got hit by a car, they got murdered, they were killed, they fell off a cliff. Something traumatic happened, and for some reason they remembered them. So a lot of times these kids would have phobias related to the method of their death. Or a lot of these kids would act out the same occupation that they had in their previous life. So a lot of these cases were naturally coming from Asian countries where reincarnation, people accept reincarnation, and it wasn't, where parents would actually make note of things that the kid remembered. But in the West, if a child is remembering things, you would basically dismiss it. Like, okay, it's just a child's fantasy. That's what children do. They fantasize. They come up with, I don't know, characters that they play with. But there's this one interesting case that I want to share with you. It's about this American case where this Southern American couple, so they're like Christians, so they don't believe in reincarnation at all. Right? It doesn't even enter the equation in any capacity. But their 2-year-old child started to remember details about being a World War II fighter pilot. So obviously they just thought, okay, he's fantasizing. He's just coming up with things. But they were like, well, we don't watch anything about World War II. We don't watch any documentaries about World War II, so we don't know why our child is remembering this. And the child kept going, like he would have nightmares, and they just wouldn't stop. They thought it was a passing phase, but the child kept talking about things. And then gradually, the child started mentioning specific things, like, then the father became curious. He said, well, tell me something about your dreams. He said, well, I remember crashing in an airplane. He's saying, what do you mean? How did your airplane crash? He said, well, it was shot down. Like, well, who shot down your airplane? He's like, well, the Japanese shot down my airplane. He's like, okay, well, can you tell us anything more? Where were you stationed? And he's saying, well, I was stationed on this aircraft carrier called the Natoma Bay. So he named a ship called the Natoma Bay. So at one point, the father became so curious, and he also asked him, well, was there anyone else that was stationed on that ship with you? Then he named a couple of names, like Jack Larson. And so his father started doing research and actually found that in World War II records, there was a ship called the Natoma Bay. This is his like 4-year-old son saying this, right? I don't even think that kid could really use the internet enough to figure this much out, right? And then not only that, the father also located the personnel that were on that ship. And one of the personnel on that ship was named Jack Larson, who was still alive. So I'm going to show you a short video. The video is about 15 minutes. I'm just going to show you like 4 or 5 minutes of it, just to show you that what we're talking about here, that not only the gross physical body is a result of our behavior, but also our psychological disposition. So how we act now, that's what we're going to become. Right? So this could work very well into the our whole idea or theme of having resolutions and really planning for our future, our immediate future. How we're going to turn out in 10, 20 years, or even our next life, really depends on how we behave right now. So I'm going to go ahead and play this video. Is it all set to go? You can look it up if you want to. But just to kind of help us, it was encouraging to even see something like this being covered by the major media, or something that you think is very exclusively to Hinduism or Buddhism, but actually being explored and researched and sort of being made available to everybody for us to understand. And so you can see that a lot of different things happen in this video where he starts remembering names of people that were present at that time when he was on that aircraft carrier. And it's interesting that when the story aired, one lady contacted this family claiming to be the sister of the deceased pilot. Right? You can imagine, and she was like in her 80s or something like that, and she contacted the family, wanted to get in touch because what he was describing was her brother. What the family was describing was her brother. So it's really interesting to know that right from his youth, the kid was only interested in airplanes. Right? And he knew everything about World War II airplanes. He just knew everything about them. When they took him to an airplane museum, he would immediately start looking at the airplanes as if he was doing, like they say, a pre-flight check to see if the plane was ready for takeoff. And he's like 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old. So just the idea that we carry around so much stuff from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime, that our life isn't just exclusively this. I mean, we forget this idea that all our entire conditioning comes from our childhood. It doesn't exactly all come from our childhood. A whole lot of it is already there in the womb with us while we're sitting in our mother's womb. A whole lot of it is already there. Right? And now it's up to us on whether we want to change that conditioning or not, because Prabhupada says here that minute independence is there. The living entity is a controller of his own body. If he likes, he can change his body to a higher grade. And if he likes, he can move to a lower class. So, a lot of times when something difficult happens or challenging happens in our life, we kind of have a tendency to blame other people for the difficulties that happen in our life, right? We point fingers, we think that someone else caused my pain, caused my suffering. But really, if we truly accept the law of karma, if we deep down, I know, and it can sound a little cruel, right? It can sound a little cruel that it's all me, it's all my fault. But really, if you think about it, if we don't accept the law of karma, then what are we saying? Then we are saying that maybe other people are responsible for my suffering, right? And we could live in that blaming others mentality, because you can always blame others, and that never satisfies us. We're still angry. We're still upset. We're still frustrated. The only time there can be some peace is if we sort of say that, yes, maybe I am the cause of my own karma. I just don't remember everything that happened in a previous life. So even as devotees, we can get stuck. We can talk about karma, but not really fully accept it. That, yes, everything about me is something that I've brought into my own self. So, for example, just like it says here, the living entity in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another. So we carry our conception of life from one body to another. So whatever we deeply believe, we'll continue to keep believing that. And we have to analyze, are those beliefs actually healthy for me? Are they positive for me? Are they beneficial for me? If they're not, right, then we have to work on changing them. Otherwise, we will, just like they say, history repeats itself. We will continue to do the same thing over and over and over again. We'll repeat the same good and bad actions over and over and over again. Of course, the good actions, that's great. Keep doing them. We should do more and more and more of them. But all the things that we are not proud of, and there are plenty of things we all have within inside of ourselves that we're not proud of, that we really wish we could change, right? We all have, like, I'm sure, a dozen things we can think of right away that we wish we could change. I mean, I know I can. There's a dozen things I wish I could change right away. And the only thing we can really do is try to make those changes. If we're not trying to make those changes, they'll never happen, and they'll just stay with us even in the next life, right? So there's something about us that bothers us, and we don't change it, it's going to bother us for a very long time. I mean, it could bother us for many, many lifetimes, because it just doesn't go away on its own, right? So we are in the beginning of the year, and it's time for all of us to make some resolutions. And this is really philosophically also. A lot of people just do it for different reasons. Maybe to become healthier, to lose weight, to give up some bad habits, to incorporate some positive habits, whatever it is, right? But from a deeper level, we want to make our resolutions, right, so that we can go back to Godhead, actually. Right? That's why we want to make our resolutions, so we can go back to Goloka Vrindavan. And just like what Prabhupada is saying here, it is stated here, let's see, and if he is in Krishna consciousness, he will be transferred to Krishna Loka. So before this, Prabhupada said if one develops the consciousness of a cat or dog, one will become a cat or dog. If one has the consciousness of a godly consciousness, then one can become a demigod. But if one is in Krishna consciousness, then it will be transferred to Krishna Loka. So for us, we want this third option, right? We don't want the cat or dog option. We know that. That's pretty obvious, I think. Hopefully it is. We don't want the cat or dog option. We want to cross that right off. And the godly option seems very attractive. Well, that sounds pretty cool, like being a god and being up there and living for a really long time and enjoying like crazy. That sounds like a really good time. But again, like every vacation end, that also ends. Right? Every vacation ends, and then you have to go back you got to go back, you went somewhere nice and warm and sunny, then you got to come back to your cold environment, and you got to go back to work Monday morning. So every vacation ends, even the godly situation ends. The only thing that doesn't is the transference to Goloka Vrindavan. So we're making our resolutions, especially at the beginning of the year. And it's easier to make resolutions right now because it's kind of in the air, right? Like millions of people are trying to make a resolution, so it's easier. Like, okay, during the middle of the year, you might say, okay, I gotta give up sweets or something like that. That's a resolution I make about a dozen times a year, by the way, and I make it every month, and I have to make it again and again because I can't follow through on it. So that one I make all the time. Like somebody said, it's real easy giving up smoking. I've done it many times, right? So it's kind of like that one for me here, but. It's difficult to make a resolution somewhere in the middle of the year on your own. But right now, there's like a collective consciousness happening throughout the world. And I think people around the world are trying to think of ways to improve their lives, improve their behavior. So we can all think of things that we need to change, we need to improve. And if you're having a hard time thinking of things within yourself, then you need to ask one of your close family members. They'll tell you right away, believe me. If you think you can't find anything, if you think you've kind of like figured it all out and you've achieved that level that you want to be at and you're good and you're set, just ask a close family member. The closer the better, because they'll tell you. They actually have a list waiting for you. It's in the draft mode. They just have to press send and you'll get it, right? So
spouse is best.
Spouse is best. You should ask your spouse, right? So yeah, so this is that time, especially as devotees, we want to change, right? We want to make a difference in our lives, and if we can make a difference in our lives, then we end up making a difference in other people's lives as well. Because when you have become positive and more spiritually engaged and involved, and your character is developing, and you're becoming just nicer, more compassionate, more thoughtful, people around you it'll just rub off on them. Just like negativity rubs off on people, positive energy and compassion, all of these things, it rubs off on others too, your colleagues, your friends, your family member. Maybe harder to rub off on family members, but it will rub off on everyone else. So, and ultimately, we're doing it because Prabhupada is telling us that we need to make that change so we can have Krishna consciousness. And, Krishna consciousness and developing positive habits, they're not two separate things. Like, by being Krishna conscious, we will automatically develop positive habits, but we do need to make an endeavor to develop those positive habits as well. We can't assume that just by chanting, I'm going to become a nicer person. We probably will to some degree, or that I'll become more patient. To some degree, we probably will. Or maybe I'll just become less angry, or maybe I'll just be more, calm and cool in different situations. All these things will happen gradually, but we also need to try to do that. Almost separately, we have to make that endeavor to do that, right? So for all of us, we should at least we can think of 3 things, right? Can we all think of 3 things right now that we would like to do to transform our character? Right? So just take a moment to think of 3 things you'd like to change about yourself for this coming year that'll help you become a better person and a better devotee. So we'll take a minute, just think of 3 things. You probably already have them, but take a moment to think about them. So I'm hoping you have, if not at least 1 or 2 things. Now my request is, the things that you thought of, if you can, in the next 24 hours, share them with somebody. At least share one of them. Because if you keep it to yourself, you might, nobody knows, so I can just forget about it next year. It's always 2018. So try to tell somebody what the 3 things that you thought of. I'll share with you what I was thinking, one of the things that I was thinking. So a lot of times we endeavor for something and it's not happening. You keep trying, you keep chasing and getting all frustrated, nothing is happening. But for me, what I'm trying to do is learn to it wasn't meant to be. That's it, it wasn't meant to be. And of course, understanding the balance between letting go and pursuing, that's always that challenge. When do you keep pursuing and when do you say it's not worth it? So for me, when I realize when my consciousness is dipping down in a negative way because of something I'm pursuing, it's time to let it go. It's not worth it. If real Krishna wanted it to happen, it's going to happen. If it's affecting me in my behavior with others or relationship, like, okay, it's not worth it. Just, it's it. That's it. We got to back off. So for me, that's kind of what my meditation is more and more. Like, you can only pursue certain things so much, pursue people so much. At some point, you just say, that's it. It wasn't meant to be. It's not worth it anymore. And let's be peaceful. Ultimately, if it's meant to happen, it will happen. Because how many times have we experienced in our lives that we tried not to achieve something and it just happened? And in a much better way than you expected. It happened to me so many times. I wasn't even pursuing something, and like a great opportunity just showed up. I was like, oh, I don't even know where this came from. So it helps us understand that, really it's all being controlled by, one sense, our karma, ultimately by Krishna. So ultimately, okay, we're running out of time here. So the point here is, again, I'll read the verses, that the living entity in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another, as the air carries aromas. Thus he takes one kind of body and again quits it to take another. So let's think about this. Everything that we're doing right now is going to stay with us unless we really try to make a change. And it'll stay with us at the time of death. The soul will take those tendencies into the next womb, and we're going to be not very different than who we were, unless we want to make those changes. And again, because so many people are making those changes right now, let's have the courage to try to make those changes. And we're here all in a temple in front of the deities. At some point before we leave, let's really pray to Shri Gaura Nitai to give us the strength to follow through on our resolution for change. And however long those resolutions last, even if they last 6 months, even if they last a month, even if they last 1 week, that's okay. You put that endeavor into it, and Krishna will remember that, and then you'll have the strength to do it again at some point. So we'll conclude here because time is up. I want to see if there's a time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. Is that okay? We have time for questions. If anybody has any questions, we can try to answer them. Yes.
So you mentioned about thinking about what to find out something that we can develop. But sometimes we come across at workplaces people say, oh, I love animal, but I love meat also, right? So I'm about to say that why are you eating the animal? I mean, if you love the animal, why would you eat meat? So I cannot say that at workplace. So how would you deal with those situations while keeping the aspects?
Yeah, obviously that has to be handled very delicately, and you may not even want to go there unless you know that you're not going to get, no one's going to file a complaint against you for saying something. If you're in a position where they can't complain, then you can say what you want. But in those situations, you have to use your own, logic and good reasoning to understand whether it's worth it to go there or not. Because when you're starting a conversation, you should, especially that one, you should know that everyone there is probably going to be against you. Everyone there is going to be in the same boat as the other person. And if there's some nice way, you can say that, oh, I saw this interesting ad that on the subway that said, why love one and eat the other? So there's so many ways to do it. But at the workplace, I think we can find many other locations and situations to approach this. Sometimes I'll do, when I speak on work-life balance in a company, I'll bring up this topic, but I won't bring it up in this way. I'll bring up a Harvard article that shows that eating meat causes high blood pressure and lead to cancer. Right? So I'll bring up a Harvard business article to talk about that, and then I'll just go on to another topic because I don't want to dwell on it. That's not why I'm there. But I want to plant the seed. I'll show an article from the National Cancer Institute that says people who eat meat have a higher chance of getting cancer. And if they eat more vegetables, they have a lower chance of getting cancer. So I'm showing them scientific research as a part of work-life balance. Not as a spiritual person, because I don't go there like this, obviously. But I show, and I don't talk about this there either, what we talked about tonight. But I'll use research, but I'm in a position of lecturing. They're there to listen to my lecture. So I'll bring up scientific articles that show how you can become less stressed and healthier by pursuing certain things. So I would say, if the situation's right, use scientific research and articles to talk about the things you want to talk about. That's going to make more of a difference than your personal opinion or your, or your scriptural reference that you may be using.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
My question is that you just said that we have to try to be a better person. Usually up till now, I have heard that keep chanting and that's all you do, keep chanting, believe in Krishna. And then I always have a question that where does morality stand? Where does the universal value stand? I have seen or I have experienced within myself and in others that the person who is a good devotee of God is very angry or he has done something and that will shake my whole faith. So does it go hand in hand or you just keep on doing all these things and other things will just follow? Because I had heard somewhere somebody saying that they are the byproducts. They'll come automatically. How could it be if I have a tendency of lying or getting angry or anything by chanting? How would that change?
Yeah. So one thing we have to remember is that we've had our conditioning for a very long time, right? One example is when we first go into the shower, in 10 seconds if we turn off the shower, we're not clean yet. We need some time in there. So when we start chanting, our conditioning is still there. All the dirt is still there, and that can take a very long time to clean. The first step is, yes, the chanting will do it, but we also have to make the endeavor to recognize, like, oh, I lie. I chant Hare Krishna, I go to the temple, I do service, and then I lie to my family. Or I lie here, I lie there. Or I'm constantly rude to people, and I chant Hare Krishna. I'm rude to people on the street, people in the temple, people at home, people at work. If we have to be, you can let the Hare Krishna mantra do it. It'll take a little longer. But if we ourselves say, hey, I need to change because that's not Vaishnava, right? A Vaishnava is supposed to be compassionate and thoughtful. In chapter 17, it talks about the austerity of speech, which means speaking in a way that doesn't agitate others. It's beneficial to others. It helps others, right? So our scriptures also explain that we need to conscientiously and intentionally try to remove our bad habits, at least recognize them, and then pray to Krishna that please help me remove these and chant. While we chant, we should really pray for the removal of these unwanted things. We can't just sit back and expect the Hare Krishna mantra to do everything for us. It can, but Krishna also wants to see us making the endeavor. Like, he even wanted to see Mother Yashoda making the endeavor. She couldn't tie up her boy, right? In the morning, she put a belt on him, but in the evening or in the afternoon, she couldn't get a rope around his belly that was this big. Even he put his mother to the test. Like, when she puts enough endeavor, then he's going to help her achieve him. So we also have to always endeavor, right? We have to always endeavor in our spiritual life to improve ourselves and in our behavior, in our own chanting, to be more attentive. It's a constant struggle. It's never just an automatic process. That's what I've understood, at least. If it becomes automatic, then it's just going to become mindless chanting, and it's not going to be Krishna conscious. It's going to be completely unconscious. So should we stop? It's 7:35. Good. One more, yes, probably, yes.
So I was curious in this whole reincarnation research, is any of the research going into trying to explain why is it that in some cases these memories resurface, whereas in most cases they don't?
So the question is why in some cases do the memories resurface in these cases, and why is it that sometimes they don't resurface? There's no explanation given. Shishi Gornitai ki, Sitaram Hanuman ki, Shinachi ki. They don't really explain. They have no way of knowing why they resurface and why they don't. It's just kind of random. But the one common factor is that a lot of times it's kids that people that had a violent death. For some reason, the memory stays with them. The mind just kind of held on to it, and it didn't let it go by chance. And it just stayed with them when they took birth again. So they don't have an explanation of how it happens or why it happens. All they can do is study the cases of kids that remember all of this stuff, but they don't know why. They don't, unfortunately, yet. I don't even know how they would know that, What? Yeah.
There's some statistical.
Yeah. No, nothing so far, as far as I know. Grantaraj, Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki, Shri Gaur Nitai ki, Srila Prabhupada ki.